Welcome everyone. I hope everyone's conference has been good. This is always a fun time, and it's always good to see everyone. So thanks for coming to our talk. So this is Searching for Nobility, the quest to bring noble type hops to New York State. These are us. These are us. I'm Jason Sahler, owner of Strong Rope Brewery. We also have Alex Biedermann, our head brewer at Strong Rope Brewery, and then Chris Holden, owner of Crooked Creek, and then manager in sales at the New York Hop Guild. So a little bit of kind of past history, kind of about us, Strong Rope, and what we've done. We opened in 2015. If you haven't heard me talk before, we work with 100% New York malt and hops and have done so since we opened. It was just after, the farm brewery license started around 2012. A lot of our suppliers all started kind of coming up around that time. There had been some, obviously, before that, but a lot kind of came on the scene because of what the farm brewery license seemed to show and kind of almost promise in a way. One of the things that we kind of noticed very early on is it was a learning curve for both them and for us. Us as just kind of coming out of as a new brewery. I'd been a home brewer before, but this was, kind of at a different scale, and we were kind of very much focused on working with New York ingredients. So we did our due diligence when we first opened, and I contacted every hop farmer that I could find. There was some list out there that I think was from Cornell, and I just went down and contact. And the same with the malt houses. It was just kind of, shotgun approach, get everything in. Because we wanted to know what was out there and what we were dealing with. At that early time, a lot of the, farmers and maltsters were still learning their craft, learning the process. The overall, what equipment was in here, was just kind of being brought in and people were learning it. So one of the things that we really had to deal with early on, and some of the challenges we faced, was quality, kind of variability, and having things kind of shift around on us, and learning how to work with them and how to best see that. When we first opened, we were very much focused on ales. It was kind of the easiest thing for us to do. I had an interest in kind of the English leaning styles, the more kind of traditional British things. So that was kind of where we were coming at from. For us, that was kind of how we started, and then it's all kind of shifted from there. So through that time, that's kind of what we started working with. So we were making pale ales and blonde ales. And some of the hops and the malts that we were seeing were kind of best suited for those things as we were trying to develop our brand, develop our identity, and what we wanted to do with Strong Rope and with New York ingredients. So as we kind of continued to grow, as the quality and the kind of understanding on the grower side, on the manufacturers and the supplier side, started to mature, kind of so did our brewery. As people kind of realized that the farm brewery license did not dictate that people would necessarily buy those ingredients, you saw a lot of suppliers kind of shift because of the market had changed over time. So hop yards would go under, or they would just kind of cease operation. Malt houses closed for a handful of variety of reasons. Some was quality, some was just they weren't into the market anymore. So one of the things that we really had to deal with over a long period of time, for the last decade, was creating brands and then having kind of our base ingredients kind of fall out from under us. And we had to kind of shift constantly, and something that we've been really trying to deal with. Hops, even with the growers that are still in it and still doing a great job, we're starting to realize that, maybe not every hop is necessarily, best for this region. So things that we might have used and built brands around before, something like Cashmere or Galena or Santiam, have gone away. Whether it's agronomic or for whatever other force, it is now either no longer available or won't be any longer any sooner, like for much longer. So it's something for us to kind of like figure out, okay, we've built a brand and we've been selling that for the last couple of years and now that's gone. So, some styles and some of beer, some particular brands could kind of fluctuate with that, and you kind of fill the gaps, create new hops, or create new beers or that beer with new hops to get it all together. But some of them, kind of built around this particular hop, can't quite do that. You can't quite get that profile. Cashmere is very unique. And while there are other things that are great that are coming online, Vista and stuff like that, you might not necessarily be able to replicate exactly what you're trying to do. So having this kind of fluctuation and this variability was something that was starting to become a little, problematic in a way. We wanted to see, we started to see that we really wanted to have like a strong set of brands that were reliable over time. And we've seen it, we've also had to play with the idea that like our sales are shifting based on kind of our growth over time and where the market is. So when we first started, like I mentioned, our ales were kind of the priority, blonde ale, pale ale. And then, as the quality of the hops got better, we started to make more IPAs. Those really started to take off. And then kind of as I think the overall market has matured, our kind of overall, strong rope has expanded, has a different, kind of location that is much more seasonal. Our lagers have now started to really kind of come into play, and they're really taken over. So those kind of three have all changed, year to year, what's the top seller. So that's something that we've had to like account for. So where do we currently stand, just overall with our farmers and our suppliers? There's less farms now than there were before, but they're more dedicated and more focused. We have Cornell working well with them, and we have the Hop Growers of New York as an organization, and we have the Hop Guild, all playing a really key role in what you're seeing. I mean, if you've been coming to this conference for a while, you can kind of see the overall marketing and kind of process that they've put into it and how much more we're seeing in terms of the sensory out there from New York hop suppliers. So that's really cool. They've really kind of understood that they need to take approach of the, understanding the agronomics that work for them. New York's a giant state, as we all know. There are a lot of different growing regions and microclimates. So what may work here up in Seneca Lake, it's not going to necessarily work for Long Island, and vice versa, or down in the southern tier. So understanding what hops work in what agronomical region and microclimate is really important. And then finally, like kind of the refined offerings, like we said with Cashmere and Galena, these things don't necessarily work here. So they kind of pulled back. So there's less overall varieties as we kind of like reset and understand, but they're better quality, better processing, better growing techniques, better understanding of what needs to be done. And that's kind of where we're kind of at right now. And now it's time to like grow that. So, next, Chris can give you a little bit about the history of like noble type hops in New York.
Yeah, so we're going to go back in history a little bit. So a lot of the data or the varieties you're going to see up on the screen, this is all pulled from stuff that Geneva had done in the past. Geneva, this isn't the first time that we've done something similar to this. Before it was basically the same thing that Larry Smart is doing now with the breeding program. They're doing something very similar to that back in the 1940s and 50s. And the main cultivars back in the day, or back then, and even into the mid to late 1800s, you saw things like Brewer's Gold, early cluster varieties, Reality G. So one of these beers also features that hop. Bullion, which you really don't see that much anymore. It's an English hop. Canadian red vine, which if you were in the talk yesterday about the state of the industry, Canadian red vines has been found all over the state. And then at one point in time, there was a lot of sots as well. And some of the seedlings that we're seeing, the Shans and the Berryville now, came from the sots. Sots was a really prevalent rootstock that a lot of brokers, we can go back and say Steiner and companies like that were trying to push back in the 1940s. So, the pros with some of these hops is that there's actually a lot of hops, nuanced, new school hops that are bred from some of these varieties because they have really strong rootstock. They are to a certain extent disease resistant. And they fit the need for what was being brewed at that time. So think of the beers that were being brewed before macro lager really took off. You had your Ballantines. There was a lot of ales being brewed. Not quite cream ale time frame yet, but the cons of these varieties though was they didn't produce as well as what we would normally see with a standard operations around the country, especially here in New York State. Some of these have struggled to basically get the yields that people need. And then also back in the day though, when there was nothing to be sprayed with, your growing practices needed to be sound to make sure that you weren't getting any kind of disease pressure, because if they did, there was no way to take care of it. And then the other part is some of these varieties maybe don't fit what macro lager became, and there was other varieties that were needed or being used for that macro lager throughout time. So that's some of the cons that we've seen. But again, going back to the pros, a lot of these varieties, things like Brewer's Gold and the cluster variants, these have been used for some of the biggest well-known hop names on the market today. So, yep.
So the quest begins, so we got to pick our class. So we can go through what our current classes are.
Yeah, so Jason and Alex, we got talking right around harvest this last year, and Jason expressed the interest and the need for hops that fit the lagers that he was trying to use. They had gotten the IPA side figured out for what they needed to do and what they were able to sell well, but the lager side wasn't quite there. And you can only do so much with Cascade. You can only do so much with Chinook. Those hops are used in macro lagers nowadays, but if you're trying to do a bunch of different styles, it's kind of hard. So when we sat down, I asked him what was it he was looking for. We need to be able to structure what we're looking to do, if we're going to do a program or whatever. And we dialed it down to 3 different classes. So you have your Hallertau class, that's going to be more for your Bavarian style lagers. You have your Sahler class, it's going to be more for your Bohemian style lagers, and both of those 2 classes can kind of intermingle in some of the different American styles, or if you want to go to French or Italian or whatever, and all this new stuff with West Coast pills and New Zealand pills and everything else. And the last one was the New York Heritage, because New York Heritage hops, being that there were a lot of the Brewer's Gold and clusters are very different than what these very noble landrace hops were. We kind of put that into another class because this is something that Cornell's also working on, and it seemed fitting to make sure that we're including that in here, because some of these varieties actually do quite well now that they've been sitting around for years and years and years.
Yeah, so we had kind of a baseline of kind of what we wanted to see in terms of our, kind of these classes, and where each of any of these hops that are being developed, where would they line up in those classes. That can kind of give us that sense of like where we want to put them and where we want to develop some beers and brands with them, or also where can it go into existing brands, and it can kind of either replace a certain hop or it kind of evolves the beer a little bit. So just to give you a little bit of an understanding of what kind of we're dealing with in terms of being able to do this thing, because a lot of these hops are very small amounts right off the bat. It's just 15 mils or something, so we're getting maybe 11 pounds total of something. So it's not a lot. So this is kind of who we are as a brewery, and Alex can give you a little bit more breakdown of what we're dealing with.
Sure. We have a little picture of our other brewer, Oscar. He's holding it down in Brooklyn while we're up here. So we have a small 3.5 barrel brew house. It's all single infusion. We mostly double batch into 7 barrel and 10 barrel fermenters. But what kind of makes us a good fit for this type of project is we have a couple 5s sitting around from our prior brew house. So we're able to knock out, and we'll get into it a little more in the further slides, but it just sort of makes us nimble enough to maybe handle this. And I think we're also set in a way that we are so taproom driven that it's kind of not a huge risk to bring in a hop that maybe it doesn't work, maybe the brand has to kind of be renamed because it doesn't fit the profile. So that's kind of a place where we're in a good spot for that. We also tend to use a lot of the bittering extracts that Chris is manufacturing, which kind of helps us bump up the yield. Also, when dealing with limited quantities of these hops, I don't have to waste them as like a 60-minute addition or any sort of bittering addition, and we can bump up our yield as well in the process. And so just kind of gave some more like metrics for our brewery. The IPAs on average are like 3 1/3 barrels of T90, whereas our lagers are more like a half pound per barrel. And then I just always think it's interesting to kind of go the bird's eye route, and it sort of equates to about an acre worth of decently yielding hops is our usage for the year.
So these were the trials that we have just started doing off of the 2024 harvest yields. We had 2 earlier this year. One was the Hallertau Triploid, which was in the Hallertau class, as well as Mount Rainier, which was in the Hallertau class. These were coming from Crook Creek Experimental Yard, both in kind of the same base Pilsner. I mean, do you want to discuss the Pilsner?
No, I don't think sure. Maybe you want to discuss what the hops are.
Yeah, so these 2 hops, we had selected 3 different Hallertau class hops. These 2, at least where we're at, did the best. The third one is Crystal, and we seem to struggle with that a little bit. We're still trying to work out the kinks on the growing side to see what happens. But so Mount Rainier was a hop that was released within the last 2 decades, but it was a cultivar that AB selected as a replacement for Hallertau Meadowfruit. And then Hallertau Triploid is technically still it's a public experimental that never was released for commercial use, but it was released for breeding purposes. And we got our hands on this to try out. It's actually some of the Germans that we know had known about it, and they said that we should try it out, so we requested it and got it. So both of these we've been growing for the last 3 years. They grow very different. They do have some traits, I would say, from the drinking side to a Meadowfruit, but they have their own nuances at the same time.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about this one was in terms of a kind of sensory, and when we were tasting them, most of, I think, the brewers and people that have done sensory before really liked the Hallertau. It was a very composed, very kind of put together Pilsner, where the Mount Rainier was a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more rough around the edges. Still interesting, but it was definitely something that was quite different. Now, in terms of the sales, we had both of them go on at the exact same time, and we had the same amount of volume. The Mount Rainier quite a bit outsold the Hallertau. Now, there's a lot of variation on why that could be. We switched the names on the board, whether it was Mount Rainier at top and the Hallertau second. We kind of changed positioning of them to see if that did it, because there was a lot of, I heard people saying like, oh, I got Mount Rainier because I was from like Washington or Oregon or wherever, so it's like, there's a lot of variation. So it can't take a lot of data, I think, from our sales, just knowing that like, oh yes, this outsold that. And it was also at a slower time for our tap room. The last couple of months, very, very quiet down there. It'd be, I think, a slightly different beast if it was in our kind of peak time in the summer, when we're just kind of flying through these types of beers. And then trial 2, which we have today, is the Reality G. I think you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the Reality G, this came from the Cornell yard that they had gathered. Reality G is probably the most found cluster variant that was across the state. It's found on many, many farms. It's a beast in the yard, is what we'd seen. If you guys saw the data yesterday, it was the highest performing, if I remember correctly, with the highest yields of all the heritage hops from this last year's harvest. So that was one that was picked of the 4 elite lines from this heritage program that Dr. Smart's doing, and it's the one that Alex and Jason selected that they wanted to try out.
Yeah, so if you went to their table, and you should go to their table, there was Reality G, Sean's, and Berryville were the 3 hops that we tested, all kind of very different, and this was kind of the one that we wanted to kind of experiment with.
And I should say that all of these hops arrived to us as a sort of a hop dust product, which was basically milled but not pelleted, which presents its own interesting challenges in the brew house. We didn't follow the instructions on the first iteration and clogged our floor drains, but they're interesting, and they're definitely a different product for handling. So I think that is possibly prohibitive. I would be interested in doing this project with whole cone, perhaps in the future. But also, we had designed the first trial. I'll discuss a little more on the next slides, but we had knocked out the batches at the same time so that we could serve them at the same time, and we had sort of postcards and things, and I think we did a pretty good job. I would often hear bartenders kind of selling it and explaining it to the customer, but I think because of the timing in our taproom and how slow things were, we realized on the second trial that it wasn't going to really be tenable to have 2 ostensibly identical Pilsners, but with a small variation in hop. So we pared it down for the second trial, which you get to taste today. Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I didn't.
Which is fun to really taste. It was really good to see them side by side, but in terms of an actual sales thing, maybe a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. And so we just did a very basic recipe. Again, our brew house is single infusion, so we're pretty conservative. It's just like a 152 degree rest. And then the program on the hop schedule is basically pretty conveniently a pound per edition for us of this dust. The best practice is to actually hydrate the dust in wort and then add it to the kettle. We thought that sounded fussy, so we didn't do it. And then it clogged the floor drain, and it was pretty rough. We just, on the very first trial, we did direct pitch of just 500 grams of 3470 in both fermenters, and just tried to keep things as experimental and precise as we could. And so then we moved on to the next one, where I did fiddle with the recipe just because I wanted to make the grain bill a little closer to what we've been running as our kind of flagship Pilsner recipe. And the other difference would be that we received 4 pounds of each of the Cornell trials. So we did up the Flame Out edition by 1 pound, which seems actually quite a bit more pronounced than the prior iterations. And we had a 2nd generation yeast at that time, so we used that.
So the hop dust, if you guys are wondering what that is, so the hop dust is just it's the hop whole cones going through hammer mill and not pelletized. And the reason why we elected to go this route was because the 2 pelletizers in the state, they're about the same size, and to deal with 15 to 20 or even 30 pounds, the amount of loss that we would have on that seemed very prohibitive to try to get multiple brews in. So we went this route to maintain as much weight as we possibly could. Something that we're still learning, but just so everybody knows why we went that route, it's just we don't have a small enough pelletizer to make it work in the state to pelletize that small of amount anymore.
So, what's in the can? Or what's in the can? So we've got Meyer, which would have been in that first box there. Helles, 5.3 ABV with a Hallertau triploid. And so Meyer's a traditional, one of our beers that we've done before, that we've tried to make that switch to kind of understand how that actually intersects with us doing a kind of somewhat more traditional Helles. We also have field trial number 3, so that's the Reality G. Again, Pilsner 5.4. You saw the malt bill, kind of a little higher ABV than the other Pilsner that we have. So that can give you like a real sense. We have a QR code at the end, so if you are tasting it and do want to give some feedback, we'd love to get as much sensory feedback as possible, so that we can understand and give more kind of overall data and information to the growers and to Cornell so that we can kind of continue these trials. And then finally, we have Vandersal, which is a Pilsner, 4.5 ABV, and Cascade and USDA 032, which, you remind me, what was this before? This was...
Vandersal's really changed a lot because we've lost hops. It was originally, I think the first recipe we were really happy with was a hop called Santium, which is no longer available. I think we've put Perla in it, and we've put, I want to say Sterling has made its way into that beer. And then the MO with this particular batch was to try to find something that was sustainable like Cascade. And I guess Chris could probably speak to what's up with 032 at the current moment, but that is also seeming to be pretty promising within the state.
Yeah, so 032, we're lucky enough with Larry and working with John Henning. So this is a hop that it's being worked on to be released. It's going to be a tough battle with the current state of the federal government, but we'll see what happens. But it is a sister to Triumph. The Pacific Northwest actually did away with it because they said it was too much like Triumph. And I can attest that they are not alike at all, at least not here in New York. But we saw a lot of promise with 032 with its growth. It's one of the biggest hops that we've seen in the yard. It's got a big fluffy cone, so this doesn't end up weighing out as much, but it does seem to have a lot of promise towards lagers, and we've kind of related it to an in-between Tettnanger and Perle, so kind of leaning towards a Sahler class, giving it a little bit of spice. But it's a promising hop that we're not saying it's going to be the end-all be-all, but it's something else to help you guys, I think, in your wheelhouse. And we were gifted by John Henning, the hop growers in New York, to name it. So it's something to think about too if you guys try this beer. If you talk to Larry, there's samples both at the Hop Growers in New York booth as well as the Hop Guild booth. And you guys come up with a name. I think we've talked about this before with Jason and Alex. Because this would be a public release across the entire country and probably the entire world would be able to get it. Be mindful that we probably don't want to put a New York spin on it. We want to save those for the work that Larry's doing for the cool hops down the road.
Yeah, so, we've gotten to this point and we started playing around. Excuse me. So what's next? I don't know if you guys want to chat about what the next steps are for us?
Yeah, I think some of that. We pulled a number of the Berryville and the Shants from Cornell as well. So those are going to be worked into trials, ideally, especially as our peak season comes, we'll be able to go through Pilsner at a much better clip. And then something I've spoken to Chris about is starting to now blend the varieties together. Strong Rope has traditionally had a brand that was all smash beers, and that's still kind of our MO is we like seeing things in isolation. But I think what we're also learning from this initial trial is that it's more viable to maybe make small substitutions in known brands and kind of just feel our way through it that way. So I think for us, we'll continue the brand field trial with these Cornell varieties for the remainder of the hops that we have in our possession, and then kind of do these blends, perhaps with established Strong Rope brands, but also when it's possible, we'll probably bring the field trial brand back because it has proven to be. I think there's a visceral connection for the customer where you can say, I hope there's a way to communicate that you have an opportunity to taste something that could impact the growth in the farming industry in upstate New York, and it's not always easy to make that connection with the customer. So I like it as a vessel for that. And something else we do just to give people ideas of ways they could play in this sort of zone is we also just have brink kegs that we can jump dry hops onto. So I think we're going to just try to explore that way and get a little bit more bandwidth, try some things out. We didn't dry hop either of these beers. So it would be interesting to see how the hops play that way. I was a little afraid to put the dust in the fermenter. So and then another thing that we're talking about working on is also having a more robust sensory panel, which is part of the next slide that we'll kind of try to end with, just so that we can actually collect real analytics to pass, because I think part of the big thing we've learned over the years is it's all a conversation. Hops would get ripped out. We were not aware that they were being taken out of the ground, and then we realized, everyone should have just been speaking, saying, hey, we put this hop in a lot of different beer, and it might have changed the outcome.
Yeah. And I think, you know, as this kind of continues to grow, as they develop more stuff in, you know, his experimental yard as Cornell, develop more, as we, you know, find more farms bringing in more samples, there's going to be a lot more growth in this kind of sector. So I do think, you know, this is something that if you are interested in, and if you want to be a part of this and kind of have that capability, obviously it's going to be kind of small scale. So you have a large scale brewery, it might not necessarily work, but if you have a pilot system, it might work. But I think the main thing is, and you know, Chris has said this, if you do want to do this, you have to give feedback. This is a conversation. They need to have this feedback so that they can do what they're going to be doing. You know, and make it work. We need to know what is working, you know, agronomically, but we also need to know what's working in the brew house. So everyone needs to really, you know, take it like, you know, seriously when we're doing it. Not that you don't take your brewing seriously, but it is very important to be able to like not just, you know, take it. You know, first day of the conference this year, I heard someone like, oh well, you know, I tried, you know, some malt one time and I haven't had anything since, like because it wasn't up to my standard. I'm like, well, that doesn't help anybody. Like, you know, talk to them, find out why it didn't meet your standards, what it was, and then give that feedback. So this is exactly the same thing. We need the feedback. We want the feedback. We want to understand what these hops do. I want to taste other people's beers. You know, it's great that we did it and you're tasting it and you could get to see it. But I want to see these hops in your beers. I want to understand, you know, kind of where this is going. So as these start to develop, as there's more yield, we can do a little bit more playing around and other people can join in. And then I'm really excited to get to that point where it is on a larger scale. Yeah, so.
And to add to that is, you know, growers, not just on the hop side, but on the malt side even, we get one chance a year. And planting is coming up, and you know, I get home tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon. I mean, we're in the field on Sunday, and some of those hops that are going to be cut, they're going to be going right back into planting that week. So knowing what to plant in the limited acreage that there is right now is crucial. And some of these, you know, some of the decisions that we are from a merchant standpoint and the grower standpoint are literally based off the beers that you guys have right here today, to be honest. And some of the more trials that we're going to be doing later in the season or this summer are going to be based on what we're going to be doing next year and the following year. But we've lost a lot of years, I feel like, from a grower standpoint, from getting feedback and really pushing that. And that was, you know, when we sat down, all three of us to talk about this, like that was the biggest thing. We wanted feedback from what you guys were doing, these guys were doing, obviously, but all the way down to the consumer to see what was going on, because we've also seen that, you know, I mean, think of, you know, not picking on other people's hops, but there's hops out there that, you know, a lot of people were gung-ho about, and they got to the consumer side, and the consumer didn't like them, you know, and there's multiples of those right now. So, again, if you guys approach anybody to do this, or you want to work on this with someone, you know, make sure that you're set up to do that and you're willing to do that, because if not, you're just going to prolong everything.
And I would say that, I mean, for what we were trying to do with this initial round, the timing was sort of tight because we were hoping to get as much feedback back prior to the planting, and that meant that actually the first trial we didn't have analytics on, so some things just have to be a leap of faith. I think we just assumed the alpha to be 6. It was actually relatively close to that. So there's interesting challenges to trying to make it happen quick, and I'm hoping that now that we've kind of got our established system, and maybe with some more robust sensory panels, we can kind of get these results to turn around faster. I think crowdsourcing and getting customer information would be great. I don't think it's the easiest thing to gather. But we'll see as we continue to experiment with it.
Speaking of crowdsourcing, so if you have any interest in reviewing or kind of reviewing this beer, you can do it on this sensory feedback QR code. If you saw like the liquid portion the other day, and he had that like that sliding real-time scale of like data, that was very cool. This is not that.
This is, if for anyone who's familiar with Draft Lab, it's very much the same flavor map, though I tried to cut out some aspects. You can click as many or as few options as you like, and then there is a sort of cheeky untapped score at the bottom if you want to leave a score. But that is helpful because we would love to say if people like it or don't. So yeah, you can check it out and hopefully we'll get some feedback.
So really, that's it for our presentation. But if there's any questions, I would love to, see if we can field them. Or we can just drink and get ready for the award ceremony.
That sounds good.
That's good.
And yes, there's more of these beers in the cooler if you guys want us to go get them.
So we can bring out more and yeah. So all right, thank you everyone. Oh, question.
So where we're at now, where are we trying to go towards? You spoke to like what is the delivery
So there's been a decision made on 032. 032 is on multiple farms now. There's plans for more to go in, and there's plans that it'll either happen later this summer or next spring for a decent amount of acreage of that hop to go in. The Hallertau is going to have more hills. There's a little bit more experimenting that needs to go on with that hop in the field. It's close to where it needs to be from an agronomical standpoint, but because it's triploid and there's still a lot of data, if you talk to a grower in Oregon, they might start training stuff in the middle of April, which is, to be honest, that's extremely early for New York. Our heat units are much quicker, and our heat units are much earlier in the season than Oregon and Yakima. And one thing that we've learned that we have to be careful with, especially being a triploids grow really quickly. It'd be like a Vista, so they're a big burly plant. We have to be patient with them, but then also because it's a Hallertau variant, it's like, well, it needs to be on, it needs more time to grow. So that particular variety needs a little bit more time, but there's more going in the ground, and we're pretty confident with what we've got going on this year that could be expanded into the future. I think the rest of that, the Cornell stuff, Larry's got a lot of plans, but we'll see what comes of that with the grants that were applied for and everything. But there's probably some backup plans on that as well to see what happens. But I think with the Cornell stuff at this point in time, there's more feedback that needs to be done, so we know what direction to go with, because if it doesn't brew well, then what's the point? And I think that's one thing that the three of us have talked about is taking a little bit different approach, and instead of making sure that it makes sense in the field, is at the same time as trying to make sense of the field, get it into a beer to see if it actually can brew well too. Because there's been multiple times where something grows awesome, then you get into a beer, it's like, well, what the heck? Like, again, there's multiple hops that have been released, and it's like, well, why? There's just no point. So that's basically where we're at on those. Beyond that, there's other trials going in. There's multiple hops. Probably 2 handfuls of hops that are going in this year. Experimental wise, anywhere from a couple hills to 15, and they will help with some of these other classes that we're talking about in here. The Hallertau was just the one that I think was most prevalent and pressing at the time. This was 3 years ago when they went in, so we'll see what happens after this year. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening this year though.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, everyone. Good luck tonight.